Hello, today we are going to discuss Kimberly and the informal assessment that she was administered. She was administered two informal assessments, one through a writing prompt and one through a 10-question Algebra 1 Order of Operations assessment. So the two assessments that were given, again, one was a writing prompt to determine her current levels of writing, grammar, punctuation, spelling, things like that, and how concise she's able to put her thoughts together. And the other one was in Algebra 1, dealing with the order of operations, or what we call PEMDAS. So what we saw when giving these informal assessments to Kimberly is similar to the observations that we saw involving her previously. She's a very hardworking student. She interacted with the teacher in a very positive way. She completed the assessment. While it may not be said that she completed it very quickly, she worked the entire time. She didn't ask any questions, which I guess could go along with her social needs, even when it seemed that she could possibly be having some difficulty with what she was doing. She still was reluctant to answer or ask any type of questions for clarification. In looking at the assessments, it did seem that she had an overall easier time with the math assessment. There were 10 questions, again, dealing with the order of operations. She was able to answer 7 of those questions correctly for a score of 70%. When it came to the writing prompt was a bit more difficult for her. It was difficult for her to organize her thoughts. It was difficult for her to get started. And it was also difficult for her to concisely put down her thoughts onto paper. In watching her complete the assessment, you could tell that she was thinking. There were different things going on in her head, but when it came to writing them down on paper, that was difficult for her. There were some grammar and punctuation errors. Also, we see that there were some spelling errors in the writing prompt as well. So all things that are common and that we see typically with some of our special education students, but they were definitely a concern for her, definitely areas of weakness. So when we talk about things that we could work with Kimberly on, we could definitely put something in place to continue to help her in her writing. Possibly some ideas for this would be to provide her with a sheet that shows her the steps of the writing process, something that helps her to organize her thoughts and put down her thoughts into writing, maybe something like graphic organizer or something along those lines. But there are definitely some steps for some things that we can do in that regard. In regards to her math, we could see that computing numbers was very difficult for her without a calculator. So anytime that Kimberly is doing any type of math assessment or any type of math work, it is very important for her to have a calculator. Again, because it was very difficult for her to compute numbers in her head. She would attempt to write numbers on the paper and multiply or divide on the paper, but again, that was an area that seemed to be a struggle for her. After a certain amount of time, she would typically get the right answer, but again, it was very difficult for her, and she a lot of times would be counting on her fingers or adding numbers up in her head or drawing pictures on the paper rather than something as simple as giving her a calculator and allowing her to use that. So again, that's something that we could do in regards to those areas. When we talk about her writing assessment, we did mention that we saw a lot of errors dealing with grammar and punctuation. Kimberly's mother and father were both born in Mexico. Spanish is the only language that is spoken in the home. Kimberly's received special education services since first grade. It has been mentioned previously in her ETR that there was some discussion about whether or not there was a language barrier and if that impacted her level of functioning or her language abilities or anything like that. However, her most recent ETR described that was not necessarily something that was impacting her that it was a level of understanding and comprehending more so than it was a language barrier or anything like that. So again, we do see that, you know, areas of concern for her in that writing prompt were grammar and punctuation, spelling, and being able to, you know, organize her thoughts in a concise way, so that she could put all those thoughts on paper and organize them appropriately.